Hi, I'm Randy Guy, County Commissioner President, St. Mary's County, Maryland, and you're listening to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street podcast, the source for news and notes on Maryland policy and politics.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street podcast. Kevin Canale here with Michael Sanderson, and today on the podcast we're going to take a look at the latest results from the best political poll on the planet, the Goucher College poll. Plus we'll get a take on whether the 2024 session addressed the issues on the minds of most Marylanders, and we'll talk some Baltimore Orioles and maybe even get into some home improvement tips. And there's no one else in the world better to walk through all of that other than Dr. Mileah Kromer, director of the Sarah T. Hughes Field Politics Center at Goucher College, and the overseer of every aspect of the Goucher poll. Mileah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me back again.
Well, we are thrilled to have you back, and I know our listeners are too. We always get clicks and buzz and eyeballs when you come on and talk with us. I think you've got a great gift of not just conducting a sensible and solid and well-constructed poll and gathering public opinion, but also like just the way you talk about what you hear and what you're sensing and feeling. I think it's catnip. So we're thrilled to have you back. For the benefit of our listeners who may not know you or may not have heard you on our show before, give them a flavor of the work you're doing at Goucher and the Sarah T. Hughes Field Politics Center and the work with the Baltimore Banner. So let's set the table for us a little bit.
Oh, okay. So my name is Mileah Kromer. I'm the director of the Sarah T. Hughes Center for Politics at Goucher College. For over a decade now, we have been measuring the views of Marylanders and Baltimore City residents on pressing issues facing the state. And recently, over the last couple of years, we have partnered with the Baltimore Banner. They are our media partner, and they have it's been a fantastic partnership with them. And they have, I think the best thing that they have done with us is they have, if you read any of the reporting of the coverage of our poll, they do this really great sort of like in-depth callbacks where they're calling back respondents who are willing and getting some more qualitative flavor to the quantitative numbers that the Goucher College poll puts out. So it's been a real benefit, I think, to the state, this partnership between us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And obviously the Goucher poll is the, first and foremost where people look when they want to talk and learn about what Marylanders are thinking, maybe what they're going to do in terms of voting for specific candidates for different offices and whatnot. It really is top notch. And Mileah, you are a political animal, certainly within the Maryland politics world, and I know nationally as well. If I can, to begin, I'd like to first get your take on the 2024 session. I know you were super plugged in and you have your finger on the pulse of Marylanders. Did you feel like legislators addressed the issues that are front and center and top of mind for Maryland residents during the last session?
That's a really good question. I always fancy myself certainly more of a vibe checker than a policy person. Absolutely. So just to be clear, when people ask me the more heady sort of policy questions, I'm always like happy to punt those and talk about what people feel about them. But, we did ask on our poll, and we do this almost every time. I will say this to listeners, like, polls in general are really great for casting a wide net and sort of like checking general feelings, general sentiment, but they're not great at like answering the sort of why. They're great at answering the what. So I can tell you what people think, but not necessarily all the time like why they think it. But I'll say this. So we asked a couple different questions, and this poll, unfortunately, and this was more about the Maryland Senate race versus the actual work that the Maryland General Assembly was doing. And that is another sort of lesson for folks. If you ever wonder like sort of what gets on the poll and what doesn't, a lot of the times it is an issue of cost and space. So a typical questionnaire is about, anywhere between like 12 to 15 minutes at a maximum length. And that means, you are limited to the number of questions you can get on there. And because of our U.S. Senate race that has, went from, a contest between, two really strong Democratic contenders to the entrance of Larry Hogan, now turning it around to, and now we're going to have a real general election contest. We refocused, I think, a lot of our attention this go around on the Senate rather than dealing with the issues with the Maryland General Assembly. I can say that Wes Moore And this, again, our poll was taken before the collapse of the Key Bridge, that Westmore, the governor, is sitting at a pretty solid approval rating. He's above water, and he 54% approve of the job he's doing, 28% disapprove, 16% don't have an opinion. Really popular among Democrats. And I think an interesting caveat for everybody is Republicans. 25% of Republicans approve the job he's doing. This is a really polarized world. And I actually think 25% is not bad from the other party.
Yeah.
I was just gonna
Crossover
add-
appeal seems like it's lacking in American politics generally these days. We saw a good deal of that with Governor Hogan, and you spent a lot of time digging in and even writing about a Republican governor in a deeply blue state. That's an interesting dynamic that Marylanders may not be single column voters, and they may be more persuadable than the average American to look to the other side and find something they like.
I think that's true. And it is like, you always have to think about these numbers in the broader context of what's going on nationally. And, nationally, if you looked at polls rating Joe Biden's job as president nationally, his approval rating among Republicans is in the single digits typically. And that was the same thing nationally about when former President Donald Trump was in office. Democrats give him about oftentimes a single or low double digit approval rating. And so the fact that Moore is able to get 25%, again, I mean, that's not, it's not nothing. It's not spectacular either, but it's something, I think, having a quarter of Republicans support you. Again, you point to Governor Hogan during his 8 years. He did really well. He had the cross, like Democrats, Republicans, and independents support across all those groups. Then again, he also needed that. So you needed to be popular with the opposition party if you're a Republican to get anything accomplished.
I think we want to get into some sort of nuts and bolts issues maybe after we get into some of this frontline stuff, but we got momentum talking about the statewide polling. I know another thing that you look at statewide is sort of how people feel the economy is going. And that, you use the word vibes, and I feel like that just transcends what you're trying to pick up with the poll. But Marylanders, what do you think is going on with the state and our economic conditions and so forth? What's your big takeaway on that kind of stuff?
So the takeaway, we asked the same question almost on every single poll. We have the direction of the state question, which is a very big vibe checking question, and a perception of economic conditions question. And so what I can tell you is 43% of Marylanders have said that the state is heading in the right direction. 40% say off on the wrong track. The rest are undecided. So Marylanders are really split on the direction of the state. Not surprising, you see, and this is again another trend you can see in nationwide polls. Democrats are more supportive about the direction of the state than their Republican counterparts. So 57% of Democrats say right direction, 16% compared to 16% among Republicans who say right direction. And a lot of that is like when you see that your party is the people in charge, you are more likely to say things are going in the right direction than otherwise. And that's certainly reflected in our numbers. And the same thing is happening among economic conditions. Marylanders are equally divided. 45 to 45 say mostly positive versus negative. And Democrats are far more positive on the economic conditions in the state. 59% of Democrats say mostly positive, compared to 19% of Republicans who say mostly positive, and 37% of independents who say mostly positive.
Yeah, I think it's like you're right. It has to be the case that people assign to the incumbent some like that's where your starting position is. The way you feel about the incumbent party, the president or the governor or the state administration, gives you maybe your starting point for what are you going to say about today's economy or whether we're heading in the right direction. But they're not in lockstep, right? You got a fair number of Marylanders who said yes to the current governor, but I'm not sure that the state is pointed in the right direction or that our economy is doing great. That's an interesting that's an interesting band of voters, right?
I think it is. And when you're thinking about approval ratings, like when you're asking people just to evaluate the job of the governor, although I think that approval ratings do a better job of capturing the actual evaluation of the job versus favorability ratings, like when you ask somebody if they have a favorable or unfavorable opinion, that's a lot. That question, I think, essentially gauges how much you like somebody. But I think that even in a job approval rating, Wes Moore, I think, does a good job in terms of his public communications. His comm shop does a nice job in promoting sort of what they're doing over at the governor's office. And because of that, I think that's the disconnect you're talking about. Like, so 54% of folks are approving the job that Wes Moore is doing versus only 43% say the state is heading in the right direction. So Moore is definitely up a little bit on the overall perception of the state. But I think a lot of these numbers are really difficult to disentangle. I will tell you that if you think the state is headed in the right direction, you are far more likely to say that you think Wes Moore is doing a good job as governor. And if you think that if you have a mostly positive view of the economic conditions in the state, you have a really strong approval rating for Governor Wes Moore. So all these numbers are connected.
Yeah. Makes a good deal of sense, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And Mileah, I want to get into the next item we want to talk about, and that is what is top of mind for Marylanders? What are they worried about? And I looked at the poll, and it stands out to me: crime and public safety, economic development and jobs, taxes and government spending are all major issues among Maryland voters. And I find that interesting because the state is in somewhat of a fiscal pickle, right? We have big programs that need to be funded over the next few years and in the out years, and the money's just not there. So there was a lot of talk about raising revenue during this last session. The House wanted to do it, the Senate less so. And I think part of the reason the Senate was not really willing to do it is because, what I heard was people will be mad at us. We just told everyone we had all this surplus, we had all this federal money, and not that they didn't spend the money on good things, but to go back to voters and to constituents and say, hey, we know we had all this money, we spent it on really good things, trust us, but now we need to raise revenue, we need to raise your taxes. It sounds like people are worried about that. And it's a top line item in the poll, and maybe that sentiment isn't there for raising revenue yet. People aren't ready to do that, even if it comes with really good programs and services in return.
I think in general that Marylanders are sometimes a little sort of tax shy state because of the tax burden that we carry. Now, of course, again, we do a bunch of great government services and other government, we're trying to improve public schools and doing the things that people like with the money in general. So I think that that's an important thing to note as well, that, this is a conflict I've seen in our numbers over the years. Is if you ask Marylanders about taxes, they're going to tell you they pay way too much in taxes. They are going to tell you that, taxes and government spending is an issue for them. But at the same time, if you ask them about the things in which the government spends money on, Marylanders are broadly supportive of all these things. Like, for example, the Kromer Commission and that investment in public schools. We've asked about this in the past, and nearly every part of the Kromer Commission that we asked voters about, like this is, obviously, 2 years ago at this point, they're broadly supportive of all these things. But when you ask, but again, like what you're getting to on our poll this time around is we ask folks, like, it's a major, minor, or not an issue in determining their vote. So we're talking about this poll question was specifically about the vote for U.S. Senate. And again, for federal office, but crime and public safety, 78% of folks, that's a major issue for them. Economic development and jobs, 76%. Taxes and government spending, 75%. These are all top of mind issues. And I do think you can apply this in some ways to the work of the Maryland General Assembly. They are concerned about being the first, right after sort of 8 years of a governor who messaged very heavily on not raising taxes and fees. I understand the hesitation among lawmakers to not want to raise taxes and fees after that.
Right.
People don't like pay. People like what government does, but when it comes time to pay for it, they get they get a little more hesitant.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that distinction between issues for a state legislature and issues for a United States senator representing our state in the national policy debate is probably like on the cusp of becoming a really interesting illustration for this year in Maryland. I'm thinking of if we have former Governor Hogan on the ballot for a U.S. Senate seat, I think you end up with some political messaging from the Democratic Party saying, even if you liked what he did in the State House, think of the issues that'll be important for a United States senator, and that's confirming justices for the Supreme Court, and think it's like a different battery of things to be thinking about. And what are his positions on these sort of tricky political issues for a blue state that he was able to I mean, I read your book. One of his genius political moves was to minimize the things he said and acted on when it came to guns and women's health care and other things like that. So that's front and center in Maryland politics this year. It has to be, right?
I think certainly, and that is the problem that that Hogan is facing. So for Democrats, the frustration with the Hogan candidacy is clearly this persistent popularity that they just can't understand, especially lawmakers who have dealt with the Hogan administration. There may be some they don't see, I think, the former governor as a beacon of bipartisanship, in which he certainly likes to talk about. But that, I think, the issues in which Hogan was always the strongest on, so talking about jobs and economic development, talking about taxes and government spending, those issues that really, I think, spoke to the median Maryland voter, which, by the way, I think that's where Hogan's skill has always been, is that he, and you can see him now as a candidate trying to replicate that. He doesn't ever speak to sort of the base, and he doesn't really think much about the sort of the progressive left. He's always focused on messaging on just the median voter. That's always where he has been at. And so, but he is faced with, at this time around, it's not just running as an individual. So when you're the governor, you get to run as yourself, and you can even untether yourself from the party. But you can't do that when you're running for the United States Senate, because your very position in the Senate could potentially tip the control. And anybody who knows anything about legislatures, that majority control is everything. It determines anything you can do. Being in the majority matters. So for Hogan, he has to also run against that. So he can't just run as an individual. He has to message around a Republican Party that the majority of Democrats in the states, and in Maryland, they don't want to see Republicans gain control of the U.S. Senate. That is a key issue. We asked about it directly on our poll. It's a key issue that he's facing. And not only that, we ask about the importance of abortion. And this is another issue that clearly, the second Hogan got into the race, both candidates Trone and also Brooks immediately put out messaging about Hogan on abortion. And yeah, so folks who say abortion is a major issue, and folks who say that they want Democrats to regain control of the U.S. Senate, those folks are overwhelmingly going to support Trone or also Brooks, whoever wins.
Right. And that's interesting. And obviously, I think the legislature, with a candidate like Larry Hogan jumping into the Senate race, and they knew that was coming, I think that sort of also gave them pause on the tax front, right? Because you're vulnerable there, and where the attacks are going to come from. I also find it interesting, Mileah, that the National Democratic Party, Maryland is not a state that they're used to having, they're not used to having to dump money into Maryland. But now that you just talked about, this Senate seat is a big deal nationally. It's not just here in Maryland. This could change the makeup of the U.S. Senate. So do you expect a ton of money to start pouring in from both sides once we figure out who the nominees are in the general election for the Democrats and Republicans? I would imagine you'll see a lot of out-of-state money coming into Maryland, because now it's such a consequential seat.
Yes. With the entrance of Larry Hogan, it becomes consequential. And I want to take a step back in the fact that all of this would be moot if Hogan loses the primary. I don't think that he will. I've not seen an internal poll that suggests that he's anything but a clear front runner. And plus, the Baltimore Sun Opinion Works poll, they looked at the Republican primary, and it suggests that Hogan's up incredibly high over the other Republicans who are running against them. But we remember back in 2022 when Wes Moore was running, the Republicans decided to nominate Dan Cox over Kelly Schultz, who was more of a Hogan style Republican, and we all know what happened during that election cycle for Republicans. So I think that's a big thing. I mean, Republicans should look very, very closely at who they're deciding to nominate against either Trone or Alter-Brooks, who are going to be really tough contenders. But back to your point about the money, yes, our polling suggests that it would be a tight race right now between Trone and Hogan, or Hogan and Alter-Brooks. All their polls suggest the same thing, and some other polls have even put Hogan outside of the margin of error ahead of either one of these two candidates. Now, I think that things will tighten up, certainly. But yeah, Hogan is a different political animal than any other Republican in the state, and he will present a unique challenge to either one of the Democratic nominees, Trone or Alter-Brooks.
Right, and then one other thing on just the sort of what Marylanders are thinking about, what they care about. When you release a poll like this, so we all see all the ads on TV, right? We see them every day, and you see them all day if you're watching local news or whatever. Do you see, I mean, you've done this for a long time. Do you see a shift when you release a poll like this to sort of what those ads are talking about based off what they're seeing in terms of polling? Like, oh, maybe I should talk a little bit more about crime and public safety because it looks like that's number one. Maybe I should talk less about whatever else. Have you noticed a shift once they see these numbers and sort of how they try to reach out to Marylanders and talk about the things that obviously are on their minds?
I think smart politicians regularly ask their voters to weigh in on things they care about. And I think that I think Alter Brooks and Trone are both sort of seasoned and smart politicians. And I think the same thing about the former governor, who I think likes polls as much as I do. And so I don't think it's our poll that causes them to sort of like refocus their attention on any of these big issues. I think it is polling in general. And I think that, I know for a fact that like all these candidates are out with their own internal polls to sort of gauge what messages are working really well. I think what the Goucher College poll does, and with our partnership polling with the Baltimore Banner, is allows everyday Marylanders through the media and our public releases to see what the campaigns are seeing on the inside. Because if not for polls like ours, polls wouldn't stop. The politicians would just not share them with anybody. Like they would just keep that information to themselves.
Right. Yeah, we know that the former governor loves polling. And I know, like you said, you have two really astute candidates on the Democratic side who are certainly doing internal polling and getting that pulse. But I always find it interesting to see how the messaging maybe shifts. And like you said, they have their own internal polling. They know what they're doing. And certainly it shifts when you have a nominee from the Republican Party who has a shot. And maybe you want to focus on more of the national issues that Marylanders are less focused on normally. But now it becomes a thing because now, again, the U.S. Senate is potentially on the line.
I think that's true, and I also just think it changes the dynamic. Going past the primary, this is somebody, Hogan will be somebody that to take seriously. I always found it a little bit silly when he first announced. There was a lot of sort of like national folks who do sort of like election like forecasting work, and they sort of dismissed Hogan outright, like, oh, he has zero chance of winning a Senate seat in Maryland. And, I certainly think it's going to be a really tough uphill battle for the former governor. And because he has to run, he's running as a Republican, and there's a lot of liabilities with that, given the fact that 55% of our voters in Maryland are Democrats. I think that all those things are true. I just would caution folks to not dismiss somebody who has won statewide twice. And in 2014, you could argue that it was his victory was the biggest upset in the entire country that cycle. So I just wouldn't discount somebody who has a really good feel of Maryland public opinion and where voters at, and who understands how to reach voters. But at the same time, I also don't discount how this huge gap we've always seen with Hogan between the people who like him and the people who are willing to vote for him. This gap has appeared once again in our polling. So every year we've done polling on Hogan, when we did the horse race, it's always like, I like him, but there's a big gap between the people who will like him and vote for him. And we're seeing that right now. And I don't know if he'll be able to close that gap by November.
So if I can ask for one sidestep, I think we're always interested in, you ask, even if it's in the context of the Senate race, but like what issues are driving you as you think about voting? And a Goucher poll is always good at trying to put together a battery of those. And we end up some stratifying of, this is a really top level issue, and other things, maybe not so. And that's always interesting. I have a selfish question. So MACo represents local governments, and one of the issues that we're really big stakeholders in is basically local infrastructure, roads and local bridges and things like road safety and fixing potholes and that kind of stuff. So that's a really big motivator for us. Relatively routinely, it comes up as kind of a less sexy issue, I think, than some of the other things that make a final list of 6 or 8 or 10 that you have time to ask voters about. So I guess my working theory is asking people about transportation or infrastructure is maybe a more diffuse issue than something else, like gun control. I think that's really clear to almost every voter, whichever side you're on. You understand what you mean by, are you motivated by the consideration of gun control policies? everybody gets exactly what you're talking about. Less so with, I don't know, what do you mean by infrastructure? Like fixing the pothole on the street that I drive to work on? Oh, I care about that a lot. But if you mean like more money for transit systems or whatever, like I don't know, different things to different people, maybe.
I think that's a really good point. And you bring that up, and it would be really lovely to actually ask a full battery of questions on transportation and infrastructure on a future poll. We haven't done that. I mean, one of the things we have done in the past is ask folks where they would like to see the investment, whether it be roads and highways or public transit. And I can tell you, I think the reason that public transportation or transportation and infrastructure is sometimes not as ranked as high as an issue. One, I think that's not, you don't have the emotional attachment that you do to things like gun control or abortion. Social issues come with, I think, a really strong sort of top of mind, heavy emotional attachment. But I would say transportation infrastructure, because folks are really divided. So how you commute to work determines sort of where you want to see the investment, right? Are you a roads and highways person, or are you a public transit person? And to explain to folks that public transportation, investment in public transportation is really an economic investment for the entire region. That you have to make two arguments there to get people on board. And so I just think the division among sort of what people want, whether they want more better roads and highways or better public transit, because of the division, I think that's what causes transportation infrastructure not to bump up to the number one or number two issue, even though it's a core issue that dramatically affects everybody's day to day.
Right. Yeah. With a 20-word explanation, it's a totally different topic than 2 or 3 words on a list and check which ones are your top issues. I see it the same way. It's a challenge for us too, to try and get policymakers in Annapolis to share in our passion for just boring roadway maintenance. It's not thrilling, right? So
yeah, I mean, lawmakers like to cut ribbons, right? They don't want to talk about filling potholes. They want to do big, sexy projects. Like, we get it, but obviously that's super important. And Mileah, I think that's a good transition too. You mentioned that this poll was conducted before the horrific incident at the Key Bridge and the Key Bridge collapse. And maybe that would have swayed people a little bit differently if you were talking about infrastructure after that. So maybe that'd be interesting to find. But you also reached out. This poll also touched Baltimore voters, and you asked a series of questions. A lot of them were about the Key Bridge and how people thought that would affect them. What did you find when you talked to Baltimore City voters? And especially, I just feel like there's got to be a lot right now. It was before the collapse, but you still were able to sort of get a people's sense of how they feel the city is doing, where it's going. And talking about the Key Bridge is obviously a big deal, and how people feel about that and when it's going to be fixed and whatnot. So what did you find was top of mind for just Baltimore City voters as a second piece of this poll?
So let me do a clarifying point. So the statewide poll about Westmore and about the direction of the state and all the U.S. Senate stuff, that was conducted on a poll prior to the collapse of the Key Bridge. So we were in the field and then had released before the Key Bridge collapsed. And to Michael's point about sort of transportation and infrastructure, I wonder a lot if we would have done this poll at the same time we did the Baltimore City poll, which was a week after the bridge collapse, if transportation infrastructure would have bounced up a little bit higher than it was on the statewide poll. But okay, so we put the Baltimore City poll in the field in the week after the collapse of the Key Bridge. And what I can tell you is that there's a couple. We asked a couple different questions. We asked whether if they approved or how the response to the collapse of the Key Bridge among key executives, which would be Mayor Brandon Scott, President Joe Biden, and Governor Westmore. We also asked people how much of an impact they expected the bridge collapse to have on their or their families' lives, and then how long it would take them. They thought it's going to take for the Key Bridge to get rebuilt. And the big view is that people were happy in the aftermath with how Mayor Brandon Scott, Governor Westmore, and Joe Biden did in terms of their response. So good on them. The public was pleased with their response. Unfortunately, and I think this is going to be the tough thing moving forward for folks, that already 42% of city voters say the loss of the bridge is going to have a great deal or some direct impact. 42% represents a lot of people. That is a lot of people who expect a direct impact. And 55% say only a little or no impact at all. And I hate to break it to those people, that I think that everybody in Baltimore City and the greater Baltimore metro area in the coming months are going to feel an economic impact somehow.
Yeah, I think like back to vibe check, right? I mean, in the wake of a terrible circumstance, the idea of how do you feel like your local and high level leaders are at least responding to this crisis in your community, and how serious do you think it'll be to you and your area and so forth. But that's definitely more vibe check than than the conventional up or down kind of stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and just again, immediate aftermath. Like we're talking like a week after it collapsed, and you have yet to feel the economic reverberations of a key piece of infrastructure no longer being there. And so, like, I think right off the bat, 42% of city residents were already like, it's going to be a great deal or some of an impact on my family. Another thing I think is interesting for the Key Bridge to be rebuilt. And, we asked, like, we gave them a series of options, like less than a year, 1 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years, 6 to 10, or more than 10, or it won't ever get rebuilt, which would be terrible. 39% said 4 to 5 years. That's what they expect it to be rebuilt. 32% 1 to 3 years, 19% 6 to 10 years, 4% a little bit less optimistic, more than 10 years. And then 1% of Baltimore City residents don't think it'll ever be rebuilt. And I've said this before, but I hope they're wrong.
Yeah, right. Yeah, same. I wonder if like a question like that is digging into like your opinion about government responsiveness to to this city or to your community or to your priority and so forth. I mean, it feels like that's touching on a number of different issues, but I don't know. I'm not sure a random voter would have a personal opinion on how long does it take to go from start to finish on building a bridge, right? Is that a 6 months, 6 years, 16 years?
So listen, I always think that my opinion is the average voter is a lot smarter than what people give them credit for. And frankly, I believe 5 years is how much it took last time for the Key Bridge to be constructed. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not an engineer. I think I looked this up. I think when I was writing this question, I looked it up. But like, if it took 5 years, like right now, a majority of Marylanders are saying like anywhere between 4 and 10 years. Basically, that's where everybody's at. So I think that's a pretty solid estimate.
So it's like the old contest of guess how many jelly beans are in this huge jar to win a prize. And usually the best guess is the average of all the normal people, who somebody guesses 110, somebody else guesses 15,000, but all of us are usually better than any of us, right?
And I will tell you why this question I think is important, not just because it's fun to have people guess. It's because it's important to understand expectations.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is it's interesting that if I was a public official, especially somebody who is somebody like Wes Moore, who is going to like this issue will persist throughout his entire time in office now. I would want to know what people are expecting in terms of how fast this will be rebuilt, because you don't want to be in a situation where if the majority of folks say 4 to 5 years or 5 to 6 years, now it's starting to hit number 8. It could be a problem for not just Wes Moore, but any of the politicians who are directly involved with this. But if they do a good job on it, it'll be I mean, people will be very, very happy with their leadership. The quicker it can get done, the happier they'll be.
And if you look at what's gone on so far, I mean, I think it would be tough for anyone to say they haven't done a phenomenal job. I mean, they've opened 3 channels now to get shipping traffic moving. Things are ahead of schedule, it looks like. So, I mean, typically, yeah, it takes a long, long time to build a bridge like that. But when you have so many resources coming in and everybody, such a big, high profile item like this, the feds are responding, the state, the locals, hopefully they can get that done sooner than later. But I agree with you that it is really good to understand expectations there. You also asked, Mileah, about the direction of the city. I always find this an interesting question. Thank you for the clarification. This was in the wake of the Key Bridge collapse. So the city poll was after. You asked people about the direction of the city. What did they say? And do you feel like the Key Bridge collapse had any impact on that in terms of people feeling like there's a sense of community, people are coming to Baltimore's aid? Maybe that lifts people up. Maybe that makes them think differently about the direction of the city. What did you find there, and what can you glean from that?
So one of the things we found, and it's difficult for me to fully say that whether it was the collapse of the Key Bridge that's driving this, or not, or sort of a rally around the city sort of effect. But 51% of voters say Baltimore City's off on the wrong track, but 35% say it's headed in the right direction, and that is better. That is an improvement from what we've seen. So back in September, only 21% said the city was headed in the right direction. Listen, Baltimore City has, and I say this as a city resident, we have our own share of problems. We have our share of challenges, but it is a good thing to see at least a bump in the turnaround of people's perceptions of the direction of the city. It's a good feeling to know that. I mean, the people are a little bit more optimistic, and it also shows, I think, in the sort of financial situation numbers as well. So we asked people in the city to think about their current financial situation a year from now. So 50% of city voters think that like their economic situation will be about the same. 25% say it's going to get worse, and 25% it's going to get better. So you have at least some optimism, a little bit, on terms of the people's own economic situation, and they are generally optimistic in terms of the direction of the future of the city. And that's one of the things I do love about Baltimore City residents, that despite the fact that there are some clear issues that we've been facing, that folks are still optimistic. They might be frustrated with things that are going on, but they want to see the city do better, and they're optimistic for the future. And I can tell you, the person who will wind up winning our mayoral race will be the person who can, I think, inspire the most hope for an optimistic, most hope for the future of the city. People want to hear a hopeful message.
It's good. And it's always good to see that people feel like the city is moving in a better direction. It's good for the state. It's good for the city. It's good for everyone, in my opinion. Mileah, we always need to get into some nuts and bolts stuff. And when we talk about polling, to provide some context. So let's do that and just get some of these questions that I know annoy the heck out of you out of the way. So first of all, let's talk about the importance in the design and the delivery of the prompting questions. I know that a lot of time goes into writing these questions. Talk a little bit about that and how you come up with that, who writes those questions, and how you make sure you're hitting the nail on the head when you're asking people about their thoughts.
So, first and foremost, there's no such thing as a perfect poll question. That you make trade-offs, and you make trade-offs in terms of the question instrument, or the question wording itself, but also the broader issues of like what actually winds up on a poll. I'm in a unique position. I think that I'm a person who runs a statewide poll, who only does statewide polling. I only do Maryland, and I only do Baltimore City. And so that certainly, I think, helps my ability to craft questions that are can address specifically what is happening in the state. Like there's no question to me, or what are the big issues. Now I also have a media partner, and that makes it even more helpful, because reporters, spend way more time than I do every single day. They're in Annapolis, they're meeting with lawmakers, they're talking with, the folks who are driving policymaking and, public discourse in the city and state respectively. And so they certainly have been able to help, why not this? Why not that? Can you ask this? And can you ask that? How would you, and I have been able to take their information and then craft it into sort of carefully constructed survey questions, which, by the way, like, I don't think, again, not perfect. I think that they're pretty good though. And then students will help me as well. Certainly, in the question construction phase, like I always use them as a focus group. And then they also help me on the back end, doing the press release and things like that. But that's really, like, coming up with the questions is all about paying attention to city politics and statewide politics. And I pay close attention to what public officials are talking about. I pay close attention to what advocacy organizations are talking about, what the governor is talking about. And I try to create an instrument that encompasses what average people are thinking about and give them an opportunity to respond to it.
So let's play the game of myth busting a little bit, right?
Okay.
So I know, so like you can actually help us with what the right questions are here, but like, okay, I'm sure you hear this all the time. Well, no one called me for your survey, so obviously, no one asked me my opinion, so this must be a bunch of baloney. The methods of getting a statistically valid sample of voters or residents or whatnot is a particular math game, and not everybody has command of the arithmetic. So like walk us through a little bit of the nuts and bolts, maybe starting with no one called me.
Yeah, that's my favorite one. Well, when and you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes because it's actually not my favorite. It's the bane of my existence. So I use this as an example. I compare. I look at it this way. So you tell me that you and your friends either never answer the phone. You never, nobody ever calls you, or you never answer when a pollster asks. I would tell you that when my friends and I get polls, we're ridiculous and screenshot and call each other and talk about the polls and who probably produced it. And like it's like a big thing among the weirdo Maryland politics people that I'm friends with.
Yes, like, guilty too here, by the way, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm talking to other members of the asylum here, right? For both of us.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know, Mileah, I've sent you screenshots before of like text messages that I've got for polling. You're like, yeah, do it. It's legit.
Yeah.
Do it. I love getting polls. So you have the right audience here.
And I use that as an example. So it's like, do you see how my friends and I are not representative, and you see how your friends and you are not representative? So the whole purpose of taking a random sample is to try to get a little bit of everybody to make sure that there's people, like me who pay really close attention to the news and excessive amounts to the news and what's going on, versus somebody who pays just maybe a little bit of attention. And so that's why so random sampling basically is this idea that like everybody has an equal probability of getting selected into the sample. We use telephones, cell phones and landlines. Now, to be clear, almost all cell phones now, because again, the landline is dying. And so we do about 80% of our work is done on cell phones. And so, everybody has an equal probability of getting selected in. You draw a random sample, we call, we think it's up to 4 times or 4 or 5 times. We try people back to try to get them an opportunity to take the survey. And then on the back end, I'm really careful to make sure that our results match the demographics of the state. So I know what Maryland should look like. I know what Maryland voters should look like. And I make sure through weighting that the respondents look like the population of interest. So that's either Maryland adults, Maryland voters, Baltimore City adults, Baltimore City voters, whatever. I think your next question is going to be about, I don't ever answer my cell phone, right? Go. Like, or nobody answers phone calls anymore. Is your next question correct?
I see a number that I don't know. I'm not going to answer it. Like, what does that mean? I'm never going to get chosen. I mean, I know that's what people say. It's like this can't be accurate because I'm not going to pick up the phone. Like, how do you account for that?
Yeah, I mean, their experience is not everybody's experience. People still do pick up the phone. Now, it's gotten increasingly, like, to be sure, polling has gotten increasingly more difficult. So back in your grandparents' day, like, when it was just, when your grandparents were our age or younger, it was just telephone, just landline telephone, and people were more apt to actually pick up and do the survey. So declining response rate is an issue. One of the things we have done to combat that is we have introduced what we call text to web as part of our survey sampling methodology. So 80% of the Goucher College poll in partnership with the Baltimore Banner is conducted on a cell phone, and around 39% of those are done via text to web. So that's the text message you're getting, like, click here. Hi, I'm reaching out from, we do like we put Goucher College poll and Baltimore Banner right in the intro. And people can click on that and take it online. That's my preferred mode. I'm a pollster. I love to take the text to web polls.
Right.
And that's one of the things we do to try to combat non-response bias, is trying to give people a different mode in which to take the survey. Because frankly, people under 40 don't want to talk on the phone. It's even worse for people 25, 18 to 25. Those people certainly don't want to talk on the phone.
Yeah, I get it. I don't like to talk on the phone. I do like the text polls. I like doing things over the internet. But I mean, is that more difficult in your eyes? Do you feel like you don't know as much if you're not actually talking to someone and you're just getting, that data through a text message? Is that any time a concern that you have, or is that just okay?
No, because so when you're certainly the professional organization, professional survey data collector, survey research center that we work with, they put little, like, there are tests throughout the survey to make sure the respondent's not just like clicking through. Like, they will put in like little, click the third option here. There'll be a question that's just like a dummy question to check to make sure you're paying attention. So ask like, can you please pick the third option, or it'll time you. So clearly, like, this is how much time the average person needs to read this question. If you are just blowing through the whole survey as quickly as you can, that interview gets flagged and dropped. So there are quality control checks that are baked into all the text to web stuff that we do.
I mean, you have to keep up with the technology, right? And there are different ways people want to interact. That makes sense. You have to go with the flow, but doing it wisely and having some checks along those lines makes sense. Hadn't occurred to me, but it does make a lot of sense that you look for some flags like that. That makes sense. So we've taken a bunch of your time and covered a lot of ground. I don't want to leave without saying Dr. Kromer is a terrific follow on social media. And this time of year, for as much reason as anything, I love polling and I love public policy and conversations like what we've been having. But you are like a super fan of our hometown Baltimore Orioles, which is a great time to ride off your enthusiasm. So give us a sense of how you're feeling. What's your vibe check on the O's?
I mean, listen, I told us that this is like, I'll give you like a little personal story. My super fandom definitely correlates. I went on a date with a Baltimore Orioles and baseball super fan last year for opening day, and it stuck. And I am now a season ticket holder for the Baltimore Orioles, and the vibes are good. Just in general, I really enjoy Anthony Santander. I find anybody who does their job with that much joy just a delight to watch. And I would like to tell you that I'm a super fan for reasons like that are really baseball technical specific. For me, it is just enjoying living in the city, being able to ride my bike or walk to the stadium and watching a group of young men who are just thrilled to be there. They play the game with so much joy, and it's just been a lot of fun to watch. And it's nice to cheer for something. I really enjoy it.
That's awesome. I know I've run into you at least one game, and you can see it, how much you're into it, which is really cool. The Orioles, great group to follow, up and comers. I mean, this team is exciting. They're electric. So that's really, really cool. And Mileah, before you got into the Orioles, super fan, you were super into home improvement projects, and you could also go back on Mileah's Twitter feed and see that and how amazing you are at that stuff. And you just kind of learned a lot as you went, it seemed. Any updates on major home improvement projects, or is that all out the window now that the Orioles have started up?
No, it is certainly not out the window. A matter of fact, I spent last night on TikTok and then on YouTube watching how to remove a fiberglass tub. I have for whatever reason, my house was built in the early 2000s, which means the garden tub was all the rage. And I have a row home size house, but with a huge garden tub that makes absolutely no sense for the house. But I have now been trying to figure out what it will take for me to remove this tub by myself, because the one thing I warn people of, once you figure out how to do things yourself, you cannot stomach paying somebody to do that work anymore. And I can't tell you the things I have done, just driving myself crazy because I don't want to pay anybody to do anything anymore, because I feel like I can teach myself how to do anything.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, and what a great Twitter feed. Like, if you're not there yet, you get politics and policy, you get Orioles baseball, you get home improvement. I mean, I don't know that there's a better Twitter follow. I really don't. I'm honest.
I don't know about that, Kevin. But I do appreciate it, and I think that I'm nice. I think I'm nice on Twitter as well. I don't think I'm a Twitter bully. That's what I don't think. That's
These days that goes a long way. That goes a long way, right? Well, Mileah, thank you so much for joining us again. We always appreciate it. We get so much insight. I know our listeners do as well. They really appreciate it. We really appreciate it. Always love talking to you after you get the latest numbers and see what Marylanders are thinking. But we really, really appreciate it. Go Orioles, and I hope to see you at a game soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys. You guys are the best.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mileah, and we'll leave it there for today. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. We will post links to the Goucher poll, to Mileah's Twitter, other links to get in touch with Mileah. Don't worry about that. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, you should be reading the Conduit Street blog. But for Mileah Kromer and Michael Sanderson, this is Kevin Canale signing off, and we will talk to you soon.